But first tonight, the story no one else is talking about, and it matters. The Albanese government is presiding over a massive tax increase, the biggest in a generation, and everyone who earns income tax is affected. Economists know this is true. Let me explain. Tax revenue is going up massively through inflation and bracket creep. Bracket creep, of course, has been an issue under both the Coalition and Labor, but data out just yesterday shows how much your taxes are rising. On average, tax revenue in 2021 to 22 went up almost 15% across all levels of governments from the year before. This in just 1 year, a 15% tax increase in nominal terms. If you subtract inflation, which is of course 7%, this is the biggest tax increase in many, many years. A second set of figures show the same thing, and that this is really affecting lower income families. The head of the OECD, Matthias Cormann, tweeted, "New OECD analysis we've released today shows that with high inflation in 2022, effective tax rates rose in most OECD countries, with a larger increase for families with children at lower income levels." This is a tax increase by stealth. These are sneaky, hidden, very sizable tax increases. And the OECD report makes this very point. It says this phenomenon automatically generates higher nominal tax revenues for the government, but it does so in a way that lacks transparency. These are tax increases that are not legislated, they're not debated in public, they just happen every year without anyone talking about them. And right now, they're larger than they have been in at least a generation. This is partly because of inflation and partly because wages are rising again after more than a decade of sluggish growth. This is happening globally, as the OECD report says, but Australia relies on income tax more than many other countries. And while many Western countries in the G20 automatically index their thresholds every year, in Australia we don't. The last time Australia properly adjusted tax thresholds was 15 years ago. In 2008, the 30% threshold increased from $30,000 to $34,000. The 40% threshold rose from $75,000 to $80,000. And the 45% threshold rose from $150,000 to $180,000. The top tax rate of 47% then kicks in at $180,000 a year. None of this has changed in 15 years. If you account for inflation, that top tax rate should instead kick in at $250,000, according to the RBA calculator. Instead, more middle-income Australians are now paying the highest tax rate that should be reserved for the wealthy. But this is most problematic for lower and middle-income families who are paying far too much tax than they should be. And at the same time, the cost of living is rising thanks mostly to inflation. Together, we're looking at a serious case of fiscal drag. The government is either happy to preside over one of the biggest real increases in tax in a generation, or it needs to adjust its tax thresholds. With cost of living surging, reforms in this area are the right thing to do.